Welcome back. Let's continue with our exploration of proper exposure with our third variable so far, ISO. Sometimes this is referred to as sensitivity. It might even, if you're working in video, be referred to as gain. But we'll stick with ISO. That's the standard in the photographic world, at least at the moment. ISO talks about how sensitive the camera's sensor is to light. I kind of liken it to skin tones and sunscreen. If you have somebody with really light skin like myself and I walk out into the sun, I might get sunburned in 15 minutes, whereas somebody with darker skin can walk out and stand more sunlight before they get burned. They wouldn't need as much protection, perhaps, as I would if I was going to the beach. It's not a great analogy, but it's what I got. This little camera is capable of ISOs as low as 100 and as high as 25,600. Okay, you don't have to remember the numbers, but ISO is easy. You're always multiplying or dividing by 2, just like we've done with everything else. But this time you're literally multiplying or dividing by 2. Start with 100, and that's an easy number to remember. ISO 200, ISO 400, ISO 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, etc. You're literally multiplying by 2. Every time you multiply by 2, you're making it 1 stop brighter. And every time you divide by 2, you're making it 1 stop darker. Now, let's take a quick look at why we care. Here you see that I've taken 2 pictures of Spider-Man. And the only thing I changed between these is on the one on the left, I used an ISO of 200, and the one on the right, I used an ISO of 25,600. Look at how different those pictures are. I mean, I adjusted the exposure so that they're the same. I changed my shutter speed. I changed my aperture so that they're equally bright, but look at how different they are. Look at the one on the left, the black looks like black. The one on the right, it looks kind of tan and it's snowy. It's got speckles in it. We call that noise. The camera, the sensor is designed so that if you don't do anything to it, it is ISO 200. That's what they call its native ISO, and that's where it's going to work the best. But as you start changing that number, as you make the ISO higher, 400, 800, 1600, what it's doing is it's electronically boosting the signal. And when you electronically boost the signal, well, it boosts everything. So that left-hand picture does have noise in it. You just can't see it because the noise is very subtle. It's very small. By the time you've multiplied it by 10 stops or whatever it is to get to ISO 25,600, everything has been brightened, including all of that noise. So if we can avoid it, we don't want to use a real high ISO. We want to go as low as we can and accomplish what we want to accomplish. That being said, there's times that we need it. Okay. On this camera, there are several ways to change ISO. It's very easy to get to. Probably the easiest is if you look on the back here where you have that little thumb pad, the up button says ISO. So all I have to do is push up and you'll see that I get an ISO display across the bottom of my screen there. And then I can go left or right to select lower or higher values. All right, I want to run it down to ISO 200 just to start. And you'll see that it popped up. It says recommended. That is where I'm going to get my cleanest image. All right, and I'm going to tilt this guy up. Where are my friends? Oops, I accidentally pressed the control panel button there. Okay, so you can see that I'm looking here at Spider-Man and friends. And that picture is a little bit dark. I'm sorry, it keeps drifting on me. All right, good enough. Now that picture looks a little bit dark to my eye, and actually if I look at the light meter at the bottom of the screen, it's telling me it's underexposed. It thinks it's underexposed by 1.7 stops. I don't know if I believe that. And if I look at the histogram just above it, all of the information on the histogram is pushed to the left side, which tells me that it is underexposed. Now I could try to fix this using my aperture. Well, closing down only makes it darker, and I can't open any farther with this lens. That's as far as it'll open, f5.6. I could fix this with my shutter speed. I could make my shutter speed slower and slower until I come to something that looks like it's about exposed properly. That's 1/3 of a second. That is so very, very, very slow that any vibration of this table where I'm leaning on it, the vibration of the shutter in the camera is going to cause that image to blur. No, I don't want that. I'm going to run this back up to a respectable shutter speed, maybe 1/30th of a second. So the only choice left to me is to change my ISO. I'm going to make my ISO more sensitive. Now, this tells me it's 2.7 stops underexposed. So I'm going to open my ISO. I'm going to increase my ISO by 3 stops. So I'm starting at 200. I'm going to move to 400, to 800, to 1600, and see how we're doing. All right, so I push that little ISO button. And then again, you can see I can move in 1/3 of a stop here. 250, 320, 400. That's 1 stop. 500, 640, 800. That's 2 stops from 200 to 400, then from 400 to 800, 1,000, 1,250, 1,600. I'm going to go up to 1,600, ISO 1,600, and hit OK. All right. And my light meter still thinks I'm a little bit underexposed. My histogram is still kind of left justified. I might take this up just even a little bit higher. So I'm going to change my ISO one more time, and I'm going to go 3 steps to the right. So that's a full stop from 1,600 up to 3,200. Okay. Now my light meter thinks I'm ever so slightly overexposed. If you look at the bottom there, you can see that there are little dots moving to the right of the 0, and then it says plus 0.7. But if I'm looking at the histogram, nothing has made it to the right side of the screen. And in fact, most of the data is still kind of biased towards the left side. So I think I could actually take this a little further if I wanted to. But this is going to be fine. I'm going to go ahead and take the picture right here. Ta-da! I took a picture. Yay! Now we've got 3 things to play with here. We have ISO, we have shutter speed, and we have aperture. And keep in mind, there's always going to be more than one right answer when we're looking for a proper exposure, right? When you get a combination of these 3 that lines up, that's exactly the brightness you want it to be, you can make changes. You just have to make changes that are balanced. If you let more light in by opening the iris, then you have to compensate that by either using a faster shutter speed or by using a less sensitive ISO. So let's take a look at a few possible examples here. Our first example says we're shooting in a dark theater. We are at f1.4, we're shooting at 1/60th of a second, and our ISO is 400. But it's underexposed, it's too dark, and we feel like it's about 2 stops too dark. What are we going to do about this? Well, there's more than one answer to this. Let's see how many you come up with. Now, probably the most obvious one, since we're talking about ISO, is that we can fix this with ISO alone. If our image is 2 stops underexposed, we need 2 stops more brightness. All we have to do is change from ISO 400 to ISO 1600, right? Bumping it from 400 to 800 is 1 stop, and bumping it from 800 to 1600 gives us that 2nd stop. So now our image is properly exposed. But that wasn't the only answer. There's another way we could have done this. Again, we started at f1.4, 1/60th of a second, ISO 400, and it's 2 stops underexposed. We could slow the shutter down from a 60th of a second to a 30th of a second. And we could make the ISO more sensitive by 1 stop from 400 to 800. So slowing the shutter speed down by 1 stop gave us 1 stop of brightness. And moving the ISO from 400 to 800 gave us a 2nd stop of brightness. So in combination, those 2 gave us the 2 stops that we needed. Actually, we could even do this with shutter speed alone. We could take the shutter speed down to 1/15th of a second without touching the ISO. But 1/15th of a second is pretty slow if we're trying to handhold a picture in a dark theater. The point here is that there is more than one right answer, and which answer you choose is going to depend on other things than whether or not it's properly exposed, because these answers are all properly exposed. Okay, let's try this again. You're taking a picture of me in my office. It's f5.6, 1/60th of a second with an ISO of 800. The exposure is perfect, but I tell you to close down to f16. Don't worry about why. I'm just being mean, right? It's an example for class. You've got to do it. So if you close down from f5.6 to f16, that's 3 stops of brightness that you've lost. How are you going to fix that? Well, again, there is more than one answer. Probably the most linear answer is simply boost your ISO. You can speed it up by 3 stops. So starting at ISO 800, that puts us at ISO 6400. That works. That totally works. Maybe we don't want to push the ISO quite that hard, though. So we're going to slow down from 1/60th of a second to 1/30th of a second, which will give us 1 stop of brightness. And then we're going to change our ISO from 800 to 3200, which will give us 2 stops. So 1 plus 2 is 3. That gives us the 3 stops we needed. This also works. And again, we could push the shutter speed farther. We could make more dramatic changes. The questions become, why? Why do we want to change the shutter speed? Why do we want to change the ISO? What are we doing that's good? What are we doing that's bad? Remember, the higher the ISO goes, the noisier the picture gets. And once you start getting up around 6400, you're going to notice that. So maybe it's better to use a slower shutter speed and a little bit less ISO. But if you're hand holding, or if I'm moving, I'm swiveling in my chair, a 30th might be too slow, right? We might need a 60th of a second. So now we have 3 variables to play with, all 3 of which are controlled within the camera. We have our aperture, or our iris, whichever term you prefer, which is measured in f-stops. We have our shutter speed, which is measured in fractions of a second. And we have our ISO, which is measured in, well, ISO, numbers that start at 100 and are multiplied or divided by 2. We can change any combination of these, but again, once we have a proper exposure, if we change one, we have to make an equal but opposite change to the others, right? If we change our ISO, and that means we have 1 stop less light, less brightness in the camera, we need to get that stop back, either by slowing down the shutter speed or by opening the aperture. Okay, wrap your head around this. These are the 3 variables that we can control in camera. There is a 4th variable I'm going to show you in the next video that is external, but it's still worth talking about.